Welcome, Jon, to the show. Great to see you.
Dude, this is long overdue.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's been a little while since we've spoken, and I'm super grateful that you are on this podcast with me. And I've been on a few of your own podcasts, and you really were instrumental, in fact, to help me to get to where I am in many ways, with not only the grade 8 and inviting me on your podcast to talk about addiction and different things, but also just your work ethic, who you are as a family man, as a dad, and even your your workout ethic with always trying to sweat every day, which we'll get into all this stuff. But that was so unique. I'd never heard that before. So just really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, man. Yeah, dude, I have nothing but good memories with you. And I have all these like random memories that pop up. Some where I was walking and talking with you or hopping on the phone, and watching you evolve over the years has been a true gift. You're a disciplined, high integrity, curious, and when need be, very confident person. And I love that.
Thanks, brother. Well, really appreciate it. And let's get right into this. So what I like to do with all my guests is kind of just jump right into whatever you'd like to share with our audience about your story, and really your story as far back as you want to go, but really leading into who you've become with all the success and the things you've had today. But I'd like to bring it back first, and then we can just take it from there.
Yeah. I'm very careful and cautious to try not to ramble into parts of the story that I think are unnecessary. I've sat through people giving their bios, and sometimes it can be painful. There's a lot of detail in there that's unnecessary. The thing that I think is important about my story is that, look, I had great parents. I have so many things to be grateful for during my upbringing. The thing that had the biggest impact on me probably was the fact that I was really, really short up until about 17 years old. And really what that meant for me is I didn't see a lot of self-worth. I think I struggled a lot when I was younger about feeling important, feeling significant, being seen. And I craved that. I so badly wanted to be important. I so badly wanted for people to see me. And I learned to see others, probably because of that pain that I experienced. So that's a big part of my childhood. I really resonated with that movie, Rudy, the short guy who went on to play football at Notre Dame. And, there's so many pieces of that just aligned with my heart, because I just saw myself in that way. And I think the journey throughout my life has been figuring out how to feel big on the inside, how to feel important. I think the journey that leads me to this day is one of self-love. That's really where I want to keep landing. And through self-love, it's my learning how to love others. Like, I really believe that the range of love that I can have for my children is as much as I can have for myself in some ways. We might say we love our kids more than we love ourselves, or I love this, but truly, I think that for me, I have found truth in that as far as I can push into my darkness and in my light, as I can understand my traumas and my gifts, the more I can hold that in other people. And then at the end of the day, I realize we're just not separate. That, of course, that makes sense, because the separateness is me and them. But my journey through my life has been realizing that I think we're more connected than I gave credit to for most of my 47 years on this planet. And I wonder how I'll feel 20 or 30 years from now, but that's really it. And then mixed in that is the bio is like, it's all sorts of things, from like building companies or charities to feel significant, to fill a void, to be worthy of love. Like, there's all of that. There's me running after things to try to get to that place where I would feel like I was enough, or that I had made a difference. And I don't regret any of it. I don't have shame about any of that. It was just all part of the journey. But I love what comes through me now. I love what happens when I get out of the way. I love being witness to things. I feel like the grand creation is something that I'm more mesmerized by than my own shit. Like Like I was wanted to make my own castle and be like, look what I built. And that's awesome. I think that's a wonderful part of life. But now I'm just looking at the grand creation being and look at what has been built. You know, and the last thing I'll say is, this kind of sums it up, is I was walking with a friend of ours recently, David Osborne, and he said, what does Front Row Dads want to be? You know, Front Row Dads, for context, is this community of men who want to be family men first, who have businesses, many successful businesses. And he's like, what do you want Front Row Dads to be? And then he said, what does Front Row Dads want to be? I was like, oh man, what a beautiful question. And you know, it's such a nice way to look at life, that we are perhaps part of raising something. We're part of, you know, we're both being parented by something and being parents to something. You know, we're always doing our part to shepherd something along, to shine the light where we can, or tend to the soil and allow it to become what it's meant to be. But so here's how I would summarize everything I just said. The first part of my life was, what do I want it to be? And now I'm curious about, what does it want to be?
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. It sounds like you're living in the mystery now in many ways.
Yeah, much more.
Yeah.
Much more. Yeah, it's learning the balance of hold on and let go. Those two things are important. It's a yes and situation. And it's how do I hold on and how do I let go? And when does that happen? And what does that dance look like?
Mm. Yeah, and I definitely want to hear more about Front Row Dads and the work you're doing with Front Row Dads for sure, and that mission. You know, a friend of ours, Pete, one of my closest friends, was attending one of these Hal Elrod conferences, Best Year Ever, and you were on the stage and talked about Front Row Dads. And I think within 3 to 6 months after that, he decided he wanted to have a child with his wife. And next thing you know, they're having their third child now, you know, 4 years so later. Cool. So yeah, so this is all connected, all of this, your mission, your heart, trusting, surrendering to what's emerging. You know, and from where I knew you before and where I know you now with Front Row Dads, I mean, that mission is just so important. It's directly impacted my life, even though I'm not even a dad. So it just gives me a lot of hope for the day that I meet the one to have a partner. There's unquestionably, maybe I can join now, but it's just something that I really respect many of the men inside of Front Row Dads, and
sure,
just the person you are.
You know, let me speak to something real quick, Jesse, because this idea of like not even a dad, you know, what I love is I love for people to try on the archetype of dad. Like we have a singular definition of like, oh, I guess if you create a child, you're a dad. But then you go, wait a minute, what if I adopt a child? I also call myself dad, but they have to live with me in order for me to call myself dad. Like they got to be in my house. I have to be financially responsible for them. But there's all these like variations of that and how it exists. Like if we live in a community where we don't see ourselves as so separate, then when I see now a child, I'm like, in that moment, I can play a role of, I won't be their dad. I'm not making that argument, right? But I can be a fatherly persona. I can be somebody that is an older man with a younger person who I can see them, witness them, encourage them, lift them up. And I've got countless examples of that happening in my kids' lives, where a total stranger, right, or somebody they meet in passing sees them, says something, witnesses them, lifts them up. And in that moment, I'm like, they were, in that brief moment, perhaps fatherly or dad-like in their contribution to the world. So I really think it's fun for people to play with that, because it also gives them some responsibility and some ownership over their role that they play in shaping humanity.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. It starts now. You know, when you were saying that, what came up for me is the men who grew up without dads, you know, which was me, and really looking to the world for a surrogate father, someone to look up to. And, you know, looking up to men like you and men in these communities that you've built and we've been surrounded by is really just life-changing and very nourishing for me to, without having children, to step into that fatherly energy. That's a tough word. And be able to just show up for that, even for my mom or the people that I'm around. So I agree. It starts now. That was beautiful, beautiful segue.
Dude, you know, can I make one more comment on this? that, Tatiana was on this big adventure recently, and she had called about 3 weeks in to this journey into Peru, and she was there doing some healing work. And one of the breakthroughs that she had was that what she would have said prior to this was that she grew up without a dad. Her dad left when she was 2. She had no dad. This has been her story through her life. And there was this moment where she realized that her uncle was really her dad. That she always said she didn't have a dad, but she had this uncle who was there for her, checked in on her. They talk all the time. He's this like awesome masculine presence that she calls him the Lion King. He's this protector and this solid human who she leaned on. And she said it was beautiful the moment she realized she did have a dad. She actually had him. And these were just labels. She just had a story. And I think it's cool when we can play with our story to maybe tell it a little differently. And so she called him and she's like, "You've been my dad. And I want you to be like my dad. And, and then I want you to see our kids as like your grandkids." Wow. And she really called that in. And it was beautiful because it's like our one of our mutual friends would say, is like, there's always the family that you're given and there's the family that you've chosen. And so it's why a lot of people in my community call just friends aunts and uncles. Like, friends, they'll introduce me to their kids and they're like, "This is Uncle John." Mm-hmm. And really what they're saying is like, dude, he's family to us. That's what they're saying. By the structure, the organizational structure we put together as a society, the sounds we call words, like, maybe that's not technically what it is, but in spirit, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. And you just made me think, I want to come back to something you said a little bit earlier. You called yourself out. You said you were 47. And I got to say, like, you don't look 47. I know the shape you're in. And I think you're going to be 48 soon. You have a birthday
coming up next week.
Yeah, in a week. And, I just want to say, like, when I think about all the things you said, but also just you also showing up as an example for all of us of what's possible, I'm curious, like, how is it that you are showing up this way with the health that you have? And maybe was there times, even in the recent past, where you've had some struggles and challenges with that and keeping up with this, way you have to sort of be as that model figure?
100%. So first of all, I've smoked, I've drank more than I should have. I have gone months without exercise. I've sat in front of my computer for way too long. I've been stationary and massively unhealthy in so many different ways. And I can look back on pictures of myself in certain seasons of my life, and I'm like, oh, that's painful to even see. More from a compassionate standpoint, like, oh, dude, there was a guy who was trying so hard to feel loved, who was working so hard that he was, just burning the candle at both ends. I was utilizing all the energy of my body to, in many ways, even give. Like, I was like, see how much I care about people. I'm literally putting my health last. That's how good of a person I am. I care about myself last. But again, all about this learning that we are connected, that when I give to myself, I give to others. When I honor my body, I honor the world's bodies, because we are so connected in so many different ways. And that gets very deep and very opinionated about, in what way are we talking, John? Is this a religious way, a spiritual way? Is this what, how do you base that? How do you know? And it's like, some of this is just, I just have a feeling. Like, it's just like, I don't even care to justify it with any facts or figures or data. It's like, it feels that way. So I'm living into it, and today I am trying to put my health as a priority. In all ways, like even this year, more than ever before, I wanted to put my health as a priority. And I also want to not be righteous as I say that. I don't want that to be arrogant. I don't want, I want to respect the fact that there could be people listening to this going, man, it must be nice to have the resources, the time, the whatever, to be able to do that. If you had, and I get it. If I had some other people's situations, it wouldn't be as easy as possible, perhaps, to do what I'm doing. I know that I'll take credit for what I'm doing, and I'll be very grateful for the luck that I have in order to do the things that I'm doing right now. But what that is like, I'm really getting out of the way of my own work. When I was younger, everything was about, what will I create? What will I build? How will I do that? How will I contribute? And now it's about, how do I help build a boat that holds lots of people? How do I help be an engineer that creates something, that creates a landscape or an architecture or a ecosystem that supports lots of life and that's not reliant on me? Like nothing would make me happier than when Front Row Dads is 10,000 members and 20, 30, $40 million a year company. I'm excited for people to be like, who's Jon Vroman? What did he help get it started? Like nothing would make me happier than that. Versus the company where, you know, they're like, well, we got to run it by Jon, or what would Jon say? It's like, what does the community say? What does, and so to me, health comes in many different ways, but one is removing myself from being the critical element that makes it all work.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And, you know, I hear a lot in the spaces of addiction that the opposite of addiction is connection. I've also heard other ways that that can be said. But when you think about your community, your tribe of men, and that collective, how important is that for them to maintain health or even help with numbing out or addictions? How important is that community of those men being your community specifically to help with these challenges that are just, we're all dealing with post-COVID?
Yeah, everything is built around community. I mean, we literally, when we're planning as a team, as a leadership team, every conversation comes back to how do we build bridges amongst men? How do we create a safe space for men to have the conversations they wouldn't normally have? So and the further down, oh, you'll love this, man. I've actually never talked about this on a podcast. It just hit me the other day and I've got it right here. Dude, this is it right here. This is it. So let me just read you what it is because you can't read it from there. But you know, I've heard people, and this is not a poke at anybody else, by the way, I'm gonna, you know, but you hear this like funnel. It's a funnel. You start at the top and then it works its way down. And you know, in business, they sometimes use that term funnel. And I never really liked that. For whatever reason, it never resonated with me. And again, I'm not poking at anybody that uses that terminology. What I love is that this was all about everything we do is to drive deeper. Now, it could still look in a visual like a funnel, but really what it is, it's like everything in Front Row Dads is to build the relationship that would create deeper conversation and the type of conversation that creates internal transformation that then impacts our family. And the way it looks for my business is like the podcast would be the easiest way for somebody to listen in on Front Row Dads, right? Just like this. They get to listen in. It's safe. They're doing it from their walk. They can turn it off anytime. They're in total control. It's one way. They can hit it on 2x speed. They don't have to answer any questions if they don't want to. Like that's the top. But then that leads to our membership, where guys are like, I'm an investor in Front Row Dads. We call them investors. Like you invest in this vision, you invest in the community, you're an investor in this group. Then that leads to like, oh, well, now I'm part of this. I'm going to show up to this event online. Again, I don't have to leave my house. Then they go to the in-person event. That's even deeper. And then from there, it just keeps going down. They form bands, which are these small groups. Then they end up jumping on one-to-one conversations. And then ultimately what this leads to is when the deepest form of conversation occurs in the community, that leads to a conversation with ourself, right? Think about that. And you could say, you could argue, the conversation with self is the conversation with God. Depending on your beliefs, if you are having this conversation with yourself, perhaps you are in conversation with God or spirit or universal life intelligence, whatever words you want to put in there. It doesn't, I'm not here to preach a specific framework or verbiage that everybody needs to subscribe to. I think you'll find it on your own. Whatever it is, great, good for you. But the metaphor is there. And then what we do is when we have that internal conversation, when we can heal ourselves, when we can hold our little child, like, hey, little Johnny, I know which conversation, who's running the show right now in the marriage, in the family? Is it Jon Vroman 47 or is it 7-year-old Jon Vroman that's driving the bus? I'll pull him in, I have a conversation with him. But dude, then it starts going back out again. Then we start impacting our families and then we start shifting humanity when we do that. But that's the depth, that then rebounds back out into the world. And that's what our whole business is built on. And that's what I crave. I literally just designed the community I so desperately wanted to be a part of. That's it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's huge. I mean, that's what this podcast is. I just wanted to get on conversations with amazing people like you that have really have had also, it hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of work that you've had to do, shadow work and all kinds of things that you've had to overcome to be who you are today. And the fact that you created a community that you wanted to be a part of, it makes so much sense. And that's a really great lesson for anyone listening too. But I realize there's no other choice now. I want to be connected in this way. And I want to give these episodes away at no cost so that people can and hear all these people I've been blessed to be surrounded by, like yourself, who are doing this incredible work in the world. So I love that. And so I'd like to, we sort of scratched on a little bit of, how you've got here and where you're going with Front Row Dads. We can get them into a little bit further, but I'm wondering if there's anything right now that you feel that you need to let go of or surrender. Maybe there's something that you might be holding on to that you feel like, this is something I'm going to have to give up, or I'm going to have to surrender.
It's such a great question. And my belief is there's a long list of things that I likely need to surrender to. We just had a group call, and Dr. Kelly Flanagan was on the call talking about his book, The Unhiding of Elijah Campbell, which is, for the record, an incredible book. There it is right there. Have you read it, by the way?
No, I haven't, but we'll definitely put it in the show notes.
Oh, dude, this is so good. This is so good. And one of the questions that came up in the group was around surrender. What does that really mean? And we were talking about that when you're in this flow state, you're really surrendering to what is. And that's where we are able to do our best work, is we are, and I love this idea. I mean, I've been playing with this all year long, is like, we're in this dance. That's really what this is. Everything feels like now it's a dance with me and with my business and with my family. It's all a dance. And part of being in a dance is surrendering to what you're receiving from the other energy that you're dancing with. If you're in a room of people dancing, if you're dancing with somebody one-to-one, whatever it is, you're surrendering to perhaps the music, perhaps the environment in some way, and perhaps the partner that you're with. But I think there's so many areas in my life where I feel like I just need to keep letting go. One is clearly my business. The more that I can get out of the way, like align with amazing people and figure out what do they want to do? What are their talents? And where is Front Row Dads going? And can they be part of this big vision? Can they be part of this mission? Can they put their talent to work here and help build something incredible? And then help them set goals and create an accountability plan for themselves and the team, and then just get out of the way, right? Just get out of the way. Let them do what they were born to do. Let Front Row Dads be what it's going to be. That is a place I need to surrender. The other thing is in my marriage. I think this is a tough one for me right now because, well, first of all, marriage has always been challenging for me. And there's a lot of reasons. It's like, how many days do we have to talk about this, right? It's like, there's many, many reasons. But one of them is not trying to control everything. Kelly said on our call today that a lot of times we do things because we're just trying to control the other person so that we feel loved. In so many ways, like in our lives, with our kids, with our businesses, with our friendships, we're trying to control the situation so that at the end of the day, we just feel loved. And a lot of what I'm trying to do in the relationship now is not craft the perfect marriage, but I'm just surrendering to the energy. I'm surrendering to what's there. And what that means to me is not controlling things that should not be controlled. That's what that means. But it doesn't mean relinquishing responsibility. Like, the other part of it is surrender to me is surrendering their 100% to them and totally taking my 100% from me. And the really interesting piece is when you play within responsibility, which has a lot to do with surrender, is sometimes we're like, I'm taking 80% of responsibility and I should be taking a little bit more. I'm kind of playing the victim. I'm blaming this person. The other way that we'll dance sometimes is we're like, it's all my fault. I'll take your responsibility and mine and stack it on me. And that's it. It's another way to manipulate the conversation. It's another way we manipulate the outcomes. It's another way we try to get significance. we play these roles in our lives. I totally subscribe to the drama triangle. You're either the hero, the victim, or the villain, or sometimes they'll call that the persecutor. And we bounce back and forth. Sometimes we're like, I'm here to save the day. And the other one is like, poor me, look at me. I'm oppressed by this person. And then the other one is like, we're going to get even with the world. And we play these roles and we bounce around. But a lot of it is for effect. A lot of it's for attention. A lot of it's because we just want to feel energized by the conversation. And where I'm at my best and where I'm at my best at surrendering is go, what's my 100% here? Like, what am I really responsible for? How am I contributing to this? How am I unconsciously committed to that person behaving the way they're behaving? How am I unconsciously committed to having a business that owns me, that I don't own it? And ultimately, if I can just say, I'll take my 100%, but not any more and not any less. That to me is the ultimate form of responsibility and surrender.
Wow. Yeah. Sounds like taking ownership and also at the same time surrendering it at the same time, which is really powerful. And I'm wondering too, when you talk about, because the theme I heard was control, controlling the business, controlling the outcomes, when maybe we should be delegating, and then same in a partnership, in a marriage. And I'm wondering, what is it like when, you think about ways of healing and surrendering where, maybe you're talking about medicines or plant medicines and that whole conversation around surrender and control in those states. And I was just curious, we haven't really gone really deep in this topic, but I know this is something that you've utilized for your healing. And I would love to hear any of that, maybe talked about now, of how maybe you've had to surrender and heal. And it doesn't just have to be, of course, with plant medicines, because we're going to get into some other sources of energy and ways to also surrender. But would you like to share anything with our guests about maybe some of those experiences you've had of surrender with those?
Yeah, this is a big subject, man. It's like any of these things could be days of conversation. And I do think, without making everything a disclaimer, which I think can be kind of annoying when people do that. But some of it's important, like, hey, I don't think plant medicine is for everybody. And I'm not touting it as like the silver bullet. But if I didn't tell you that plant medicine had been powerful for me, I would be lying. I wouldn't be telling you the whole story. I would be trying to control the narrative by, but the truth is it's been profound for me. And I had to put my toe in the water and I slowly found my way there, and I had to do the research and I had to do it my way to land there. I had to have people I trusted. I needed to go at this the way I needed to go at it. But I'll take you right into one of my big journeys, which was, I'm assuming it's okay to talk about specifics here on this show. Yeah. So, this was a ceremony that was led by facilitators. These were professionals. I was with a group of people in a safe environment. I knew people well. I trusted this environment. I had thought about doing this. I had done my homework leading up to it. There was preparation. And so in this particular ceremony, the protocol is MDMA and psilocybin. And the dose was a hero's dose of psilocybin, which is in this particular case, was 6 grams for me. And when I tell you that it was the first time in my life and I'm going to tell you exactly what I told my dad, what I told my parents about this, was that it was the first time in my life that I felt like my tether to reality was completely cut. I was off on a journey. I was not in control. My ego was completely put aside. Whenever I had done therapy in the past or work in the past with counselors, my ego was always very, very present. It was there protecting me. It was thinking about things consciously. It was, how do I want to answer this question? How much do I want to reveal? In this particular journey, I had just completely let go and was off in my experience. That experience was ultimately like how somebody would describe if they were like, the stories that you hear, like they died on the operating table, they went to heaven, and then they came back and they're like, they said, I was there. Dude, I don't think that's crazy at all, because that's exactly what happened to me, but not in a scary way, but in a beautiful way. I was in another dimension, another realm, heaven, whatever you want to call it. And I was looking back on my life, and it wasn't like a pretend exercise that I no longer had a family, a wife, kids, a job, or whatever. I was actually removed from it and felt the lightness of letting go of my entire identity. as a human. I let go of my entire identity as a human. And the message, if there was a headline from this experience and somebody goes, in as few words as possible, what did day one mean to you in this medicine journey, or whatever you want to call it, plant medicine, or call it drugs. It doesn't matter to me what you want to call it. The point is, these are plants. They create an effect. And my effect was, the message was so clear that it was let go. That was it. It was so clear. The message was let go. And what I had read hundreds of books, been to countless seminars, hired countless coaches and therapists, and done the deepest work I could do without these particular plants in my life. And what it showed me was a side of what my parents would always, so my parents are very religious. They are Christian, they go to church, they subscribe, they read the Bible. And my dad would always say, when you find spirituality, I think you're going to find another gear. And I told my dad, I said, well, I don't particularly subscribe to the religious practices that you do. I 100% feel a spiritual alignment in my life, and that might have been the most spiritual experience I've ever had in my life, to know that there is something far beyond this current world of what I can articulate. Because when I came back from that experience, there were no words that I could say. It was a beautiful experience. It was not scary for me. Although people have scary experiences, it was not, I wasn't thrashing. I wasn't screaming. Although that happens to people, mine was this beautiful experience of having the tether to life completely cut. And I felt that. And I still know what that feels like now. And what's cool is it reminded me of my impermanence. It reminded me of my mortality. It reminds me of this very short, subjective statement clearly, but short journey that we have. And what that did is it freed me of oftentimes making things so serious. You know, I when I was talking to David recently, my buddy David Osborne, walking down the beach, and I was like, dude, when you think about it, you have these two little humans on this beach, and if you keep zooming out, like this is this one beach in one country in this world, and if you keep zooming out and you see the whole universe, the whole solar system, and sometimes you get these two people on the beach running, racing each other, and they feel like whether they win or lose that race, it's everything. And that's like a little metaphor for how we sometimes think about life. I'm like, this thing is so big, it's so vast, that what it did for me, Jesse, was it allowed me to get out of the way. I was the bottleneck in my life in so many ways. I was the bottleneck. I was stunting my children's growth. I was stunting my wife's growth. I was stunting the business growth because I made myself so important in the process. And the thing is, I know I am an important part of the process, because to deny me would be to deny life, to deny you. Like, I believe that I should love myself. I should bring the best of me to the table. But it's not only me. That's what ego wants to do. It separates you from everybody. It's you and them. But this medicine journey for me was like, dude, this thing is so beautiful and so big. You don't have to control everything. You get to just dance with it and let go. And that's just day one, by the way. Day two, I'm not going to keep ranting here, but I'm going to pause because I want to let you chime in or reflect or whatever. But dude, and this is me just scratching the surface, really. But I think that captures the essence of that experience.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I really appreciate vulnerability. And I probably want to hear about day two in just a moment. But I think I want to just come to one of the things you said about all the work you were doing before you ever met the medicines. And I think that's just something I want to also say to the listeners, that there was, I know for myself, there was 15 years in the making, if not more, before I ever considered coming to any type of psychedelic assisted therapy or any type of work in this kind of field. And when you said that, I just wanted to remind everyone that I know how hard you worked, and I know how hard I've worked before we ever went. I'm talking over 10 years of therapy and every type of way you can imagine to heal that I knew of, that I could have access to before I made that decision. And so I want to say that first, that's really important. And also the experience that you described, I mean, what a perfect experience with what you're actually working to surrender or letting go now, to come back to remind yourself of that experience, of how that can apply directly to the now moment. And that's the other piece, is integration. And how are you integrating that, as you just beautifully described?
The integration is the work, because this is all that the experience did was to show me a possibility. And now it's my job to live into that possibility. So it said, hey, this is what it can look and feel like. But you have to wake up every day and choose that path. If you want to choose to surrender, then, like, I'm working really hard. I love building in my business. I love sitting and sketching, and my whole wall is filled with frameworks and sketches. And I love it. I love being with the team. I love being on calls and designing events. And I love doing the work. Like, I'm not just throwing my hands up and being like, it's going to be what it's going to be. Like, it's not it, man. I'm like, no, man, I get to build. I still have these two hands and this heart and this mouth that I get to speak these ideas. And we get to be in communion with each other and building together. I just don't think my way is the only way. And I'm much more curious now, but that is the integration. That is the work, man. And, there's so much, I think, pre-work and post-work that has to happen. But ultimately, it needs to be this community that you land in. The most beautiful part of the ceremonies that I've been a part of has been sitting in a circle at the end and sharing our experiences. And, honestly, half the time, I'm not sure how much value I'm getting from me. And like, I wasn't even on their journey, but what they just reported to me might be the most profound thing I've ever heard, because they did the work, and then they brought their breakthrough and their discovery and their ideas. Oh, I love that, man. I just think it's really an incredible space.
And what do you think, like, when, I know you're big into, of course, like even healing the nervous system and really focusing on, how important that plays a role. And when you think about the way you grew up and feeling short, and how that played a role in the man that you became in all these ways that you've overcome and really thrived. But when you think about your nervous system then, when you were trying to be larger than you, that acceptance, and then today to be who you are, like, how do you regulate your nervous system today? You're obviously not doing, and that's the point of the message. You're not doing medicines every day. That's not the point. It's what do we do beyond that? So what are some of the things that you do today to regulate your nervous system and to stay in that mindset?
Yeah. And medicine is such an interesting word too, right? Because like, there's just how do we define that term? Because can mantras be medicine? Can the breath be medicine? Can we, it just depends on how we define these terms. But ultimately what we're talking about is integrating something into our life for an effect. That's what we're talking about. That's why food can be medicine. That's why we react. We can have allergic reactions to food. It can heal us. It can hurt us. When we eat sugar, it spikes our, we're always interacting with the world. We know that the breath is the main lever that we can pull to regulate our nervous system. We know that through science, and we know it intuitively too, that when we take breaths, if we look to nature and how nature behaves, when we take these deep breaths, we can intentionally put our body into a parasympathetic state. I never realized how much I was actually in fight or flight until I wasn't, right? And I'm like, holy cow, I was fight or flight from the minute I would wake up. Like, I'd wake up with just cortisol coursing through my veins, go. Like, how fast could I get moving? And, I was running towards or away from something all day long. And I didn't value peace, silence, stillness. I actually now see stillness is a move. So I used to want to make movement all the time. Yep.
Sorry, there's a freaking lawnmower coming by landscaping here. I apologize.
Oh, you barely hear it.
You can't hear
it?
it?
You can barely hear it.
Let's keep rolling. Sorry to interrupt.
Barely. It's stillness is a move. That's the point. Like, if you stop, that's an action. That's an intentional action. I realized that it's just me taking a moment to see the pieces on the chessboard and be more strategic. There's no question that when I play fast chess, I'm not as good as when I take a moment and think about my next move. There's no question that if I react very quickly to my kids, I typically typically, not all the time, but because sometimes gut reactions are important. Speed is what's needed. But for the most part, when I pause, when I give space, I'm far more effective, right? It's like, it's sharpening the axe and taking less swings. That's all that it is. And for me, this has been a constant journey. It's not been one event, not one plant medicine ceremony, not one book, not one strategy. It's literally like, it's all of it. But dude, I was at Burning Man last year, my first time ever, and I was crashing in the middle of it. Dude, my wife and I are we're literally, and this is not, I'm being serious, she's writing me a divorce letter, and I'm not worried about it because we're breaking up in the middle of Burning Man. It's, the temperature's hot, there's dust storms, you're uncomfortable. It's like, it's testing you. Nowhere to hide, no cell phones, can't, like you're facing oftentimes your toughest stuff. They always say like, so much is revealed on the playa, they call it, right? And I remember sitting down with a guy who I met in the camp that year. His name's Joshua Wenner, Wenner. And he does nervous system work with men. He'd actually be a really good guest for you at some point on this show. And he's a really amazing human. Joshua sat down with me at probably what was 1 or 2 in the morning. And he helped me. I mean, to articulate it would be tough, but imagine him just talking to me, sitting in 2 chairs in the middle of camp, talked to me for an hour or 2, helped me to learn about my nervous system. That changed my life. Like that was a critical moment for me of learning how to regulate through him. That's what I didn't even start really studying the nervous system until last year. I didn't really understand it. I kind of got it. I understood what fight or flight was. I understood that, but not deeply. I didn't do the deep work. Then I invited Joshua to come to our live event, which we had 125 dads in Texas, Front Row Dad Live. And it was an amazing event. Joshua was one of the highest rated speakers of the event. And all he did was teach men how to understand and regulate their nervous system. Highest rated speaker. Like men need this because if you're a parent out there and you've ever lost your shit on your kids, freaked out, yelled, all those things, like, first of all, you're human. Don't beat yourself up too much. I don't think I've met many people that haven't, right? Like that's a more common experience. And that also isn't to say, well, I guess that's just being a parent. Nothing I can do about it. That's not true either, because you can learn to regulate your nervous system. And then when you learn to regulate your nervous system, you give that gift to your kids. And then you can start to heal generational trauma. Dude, I've got a story for you.
Please.
Do you want to hear it?
Yes.
I did a breathwork healing session with a woman 2 years ago. This is somatic body work, breath work. I kind of went in, I'm like, dude, I've done so much work. I've been to all these conferences, read all these books. I'm a podcast host. I lead a men's group. Like there's definitely an ego voice going, am I really going to learn anything here? So dude, she does all these things. She got me, asking me questions, and she lays on the table. I'm doing this breath. And then she's like, walk me back in time. Take me to a point in your childhood. And I'm like, I know the story. I'm going to tell you about my dad when he came home from work and I jumped out from underneath the desk and I tried to scare him. And by the way, I've told this story before. I knew it was uncomfortable for me. I was telling her how traumatic it was, but then something happened. Whatever she did in her beautiful magic, right? Her method, her way of being a great healer, I started bawling. And actually, as I'm bawling, I'm judging myself for bawling. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you, Jon? Like, dude, you've already dealt with this. You already know this. Why the fuck are you bawling? And I realized that part of it was that I had all this trapped in my body that I had never released. Now, by the way, logically, that didn't make sense to me. I'm like, I intellectually process this. In your body. Like, it just sounds too woo for me. Sounds like woo-woo bullshit. And I'm like, I did not subscribe to it until I felt it and it released. And here's what's interesting. So through my whole adult life, now again, 47 years old, right? Ask anybody who knows me. If you try to scare me, you might get knocked out. Like, not joking. My wife knows, don't scare Jon. My kids know, don't scare dad, because I don't react well. It feels uncontrollable. Like my instant reaction is, I want to murder you, because I think the story I believe now, Jesse, is my nervous system was so on edge about that. It anchored in that scaring people equals, I just locked it into my system, however you want to articulate that. My body locked it in. I jumped out and scared my dad. He freaked out on me. Navy captain, came home from a long day of work. I jump out, boo! And he's like, shut the fuck up, whatever it was. However he responded. I don't remember what he said. I don't remember what he did, but I know it wasn't pleasant, right? And that was it. Dude, it was locked in my body. I've been doing all this work. My whole world right now is healing. That's it. I undervalued healing. But the last year, man, all about healing. How can I heal myself? How can I heal my nervous system? How can I heal past traumas? Dude, I'm sitting at the beach this past weekend. This is days ago I'm talking. I've got my hands in the sand. I've got my headphones on, and I'm totally just dialed in to nature, the waves. I'm in this beautiful, blissful space, and Ocean comes up behind me, my 8-year-old, right? Comes up behind me and scares me, right? And I don't see him coming. You know what happened? Nothing. My body didn't react at all. And what was beautiful about that is I was about Ocean's age when I scared my dad and he reacted. And right there in that moment, Jesse, I believe I healed what they call generational trauma, where you get traumatized as a child. You may not realize it even consciously how it happened, but you pass it along to your kids. It's like this DNA blueprint, vibe that you're like, hey, it happened to me and that's happening to you. And we just keep passing it on, right? In that moment, I realized that's the fucking metaphor for life, where when I do the work as a dad, when I heal myself, my son comes up and scares me, I don't react. I give him a big, oh, buddy, come here. It's so good to see you. And I give him a big hug. And I'm like, his experience now is different. Full disclosure, because I want to be human for everybody here. Look, I'm very proud to say I've got a lot of shit figured out as a dad. I do. I've worked really hard on it. I've earned the right to make that statement today. I know it. I believe it in my body. There's a lot of things I do that I'm like, I'm proud of myself. I know I'm being a great dad. The reactions from my kids, the relationship we have, it's beautiful. I've also screwed up a lot, and I'm still screwing up a lot. So as I share these moments with you of discovery and healing and breakthrough, I want to confess my humanity too, to say I've still got a long way to go. But damn, I'm proud of the ones that I'm getting victories with right now. I'll take the W's when I get them.
What do I even say after that? That was incredible. It was like a completion cycle and healing generational trauma, which is directly passed into Ocean and your family. So really, thank you, brother, for sharing that. I was extremely deep, and that's, wow. If we ended on that, I think this would be an incredible show, but we should keep going. And I would love to hear more too about maybe your journey with where your highest vision is calling you right now. So, we've talked a little bit about the past, and I know we can keep saying the nervous system thing for a while, but I'm just curious, what is your vision, your highest intentions that you're bringing to reality? I mean, you just had this healing experience a few days ago. So what do you see now as manifesting in your life?
Well, dude, I want to keep on this path. I feel like I've got work to do. I still have a lot of healing that probably needs to be done. And the beautiful thing about healing is that sometimes we don't know what needs to be healed. It's not like we're going in going, this is the thing that needs to be healed. It's sometimes if you surrender to the healing process, if you put yourself in healing environments, generally what happens is something gets healed and you're like, fuck, didn't even know that. Didn't even know that had a grip on me until you just gave space for it to emerge. And dude, I remember being in an event years ago where the person who was leading said, hey, if anybody would like a blessing or a healing, and not in a religious sense, but just would you like a blessing? Hey, I wish all good things would come to you. Or a healing. I remember saying to myself in this moment, this is 4 years ago, I go, I don't think I have anything that needs to be healed. And by the way I say that now, I think that's the funniest thing I could have said, but it was true for me. Yeah. I wasn't that's literally how I felt. And so my invitation to anybody that's in that I'm speaking to, directly or indirectly, would be, the invitation is to surrender to healing. And the kind of the story that I use, the metaphor that I use around this is guys in my community will sometimes say, how do I get my wife to tackle personal growth like I'm tackling it? Or how do I get my kids to do this thing that, I want to do? And I'm putting the book on the table and I'm inviting them and I'm suggesting it and I'm putting, music on in the background. I'm doing all these things that I'm trying to like entice this person to move, right? And you hear it in all different ways. I'm just kind of giving a couple of examples. But the way I look at it is I look at it like dancing. So imagine that life is like, you got this person who's sitting down and you're on the dance floor. It's whatever you're good at. It's your business. It's your thing. You're on your soapbox. You're preaching. You got to get in here. You got to come to my event. You got to go to this event. You got to read this book. You got to do this thing. We all have done that, right? Like we learn something and we're like, the world needs this. I got the solution. But so we're busy dangling carrots to get them on the dance floor. I'll put on different music for you. You can wear whatever clothes you want. I'll lead. I'll let you lead. Let's start slow. Nobody can see you if you're dancing. Like just all the metaphors of getting somebody on the dance floor, right? Have a drink, loosen up, whatever it is, right? But the thing that we sometimes fail to realize, Jesse, is the person sitting there with a metaphorical broken leg. And no matter how much you dangle a carrot, change the music, tell them you're going to lead, do all the things, tell them they're a great dancer, they're not going to fucking dance until they heal. And sometimes when people heal and you're like, where'd all the dancing come from? That person's a dancing fool. Not because you told them how to dance, not because you showed them the right video, not because you put on the right music, but because you just let them heal. And sometimes in a relationship, sometimes in a business, sometimes what the relationship doesn't need is more conversation, more direction, more frameworks, more steps. It doesn't need that. It just needs for the person to be able to heal. And then who comes to the relationship, who comes to the business, who comes to the community is a healed person. If you look around globally, a lot of the problems, I think when we heal ourselves, we start healing the planet. We start healing our communities. We start healing our conversations. But if we put as much effort into healing as we do blaming people or trying to pretend like we know the only way to live life and this is the right way to do shit, I think that's a flawed system. That's my projection. That's my belief. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's my story. And even the fact that I'm saying it's a story is a story. But I'll tell you what feels good to me right now. My experience of the world is benefiting from space for healing. That's it. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. And the answer is yes and. For most of it's yes and. It's like, yeah, you're right and you're wrong. And you figured something out and you're blind to this other thing. But man, if I'm trusting my inner guidance, it's pointing me in the direction of healing right now.
Well, that just brought up another idea that I'd like to go into. That was beautiful. You're sparking these ideas, and I think there's going to be many listeners, and I know I have people in my life that have gone on incredible healing journeys that have been beyond personal development. They've been really deep nervous system healing journeys and healing lots of trauma from bullying as a kid, and which I think is a big theme actually with many successful entrepreneurs. I'm starting to learn that bullying for some of these entrepreneurs to become who they've become. But what would you say to someone, just to go a little deeper, if you're on all these awakenings and all these healings you've had in the last year, and you're just on fire for this stuff because it's just the time. But what do you do with a partner or even a family member who is not coming along that journey? They're really stuck. They're stuck in the way things are. How do you hold the space for someone to come along that journey?
Yeah. Well, you just said it. You hold the space and that's it. Yeah. You can't control whether they're going to do it or not. You can't control your kids. You can't control your spouse. You can't control your employees or your teammates. You can't control your friends. You're just not going to control it. And so part of that is just surrendering, what you can do is work to create safety. And first from within. Can you be safe for yourself? And then you can study how to create safety for other people. I had this great conversation with my 13-year-old, I don't know, a couple months ago now. And I just took him out for coffee or whatever. We went and we were sitting down and I was like, hey man, I want to have a conversation with you that I think most dads will never have with their kids. I'm just guessing. I don't know many dads that do. This conversation didn't happen with me, but I really feel that this is important. And I said, I want to just bring up things that are maybe uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable for me, and I'm guessing they're uncomfortable for other guys, and they're probably uncomfortable for you. So we're going to call this conversation awkward as fuck. That's what I said to my 13-year-old. And I go, tell me what you know about porn, right? Tell me what you know about porn. I don't know. Have you seen it? Has anybody introduced you to it? And then I was just like, I go, look, several times throughout the conversation, I was like, I just want you to shoot me straight. Don't think about what answer you need to give me, because the reality is I care about you. I love you. And I want you to be able to talk to me about things. Look, I'm not your best friend. I won't ever be. I'm not 13. You know, I also don't want to be only this authority figure where you're like, I don't want to tell dad, you know, because I go, but there's this like blend of like, yeah, I'm your dad and I want you to be able to trust me. So we just had this really honest conversation. I was like, you ever seen drugs? Anybody ever offered you drugs? You know, what do you know about drugs? Which drugs are quote unquote good or bad? I go, because everything's a drug. Food's a drug. Like we had this whole conversation and I'm like, you know, I could argue that honestly, you know, drinking alcohol might be worse than smoking pot, but society might tell you that pot's worse than alcohol because we've normalized alcohol. I go, I want to have a real conversation with you that shatters the constructs that society might cast out for us. Dude, it was the most incredible conversation. And without revealing anything to you guys, to your audience, whatever, because I would never do that. I'm vulnerable with you about my part, right? Because I can be. I would never tell you what he said, but he told me some pretty cool things. I'll just leave it at that, right? Like he told me some pretty cool things. And our relationship after that day was so much deeper and more authentic and more real. I got to tell you, man, I was scared as fuck going into that conversation. I had a lot of insecurity. I'm like, how do I even say this? Like, you know, because you just start to like paint the picture in your head. You're like, it's going to be really awkward where I'm like, son, we need to talk about, what do we call it? Sex? You know, like you could just make it so awkward. So I just confessed to it. I'm like, let's call this conversation fucking awkward because I don't really know how to have it, but let me just try to say it like it is. And let me not sugarcoat it. Like Ocean, who's 8, who asked me about sex recently. He's like, does sex have something to do with a penis and a vagina? And I was like, yeah, it's exactly what happens. This guy sticks his penis in a vagina. They make a baby. Like, and by the way, I just started talking to my kids like humans. Like, you know, not the type of thing where I'm like, oh, let me see how smart you are. Let me bite my tongue a lot. Let me hesitate, which means I'm filtering, which means I'm not sure that I trust you, which means I don't know that I trust myself, which means that, you know what I mean? Like it just, all that creates an unhealthy dynamic. And I get it. I understand why it happens, but I'm like, I just want to be real with my kids. And by the way, real to me doesn't mean exposing them to a bunch of things they shouldn't be exposed to. Real is not like taking a 13-year-old and introducing 25-year-old material so for the sake of being authentic or trying to be ahead of the curve. Like when you're a parent, you're dialed in. When you're a business owner, you're dialed in. When you're a friend and you're dialed in. When you're a spouse and you're dialed in. If you really know you and that person, you'll know what's appropriate in that moment. You don't need a book to tell you what you should and shouldn't say. You just check in. And if you don't know, it's because you're not present. If you don't know, it's because you're probably not engaged. So get engaged and then you'll know for the most part. No silver bullets here, but that's generally speaking what I find to be true for me. Maybe other people will find it to be true for them.
Well, what I hear is authenticity. You know, you are genuinely authentic with both your children, you know, Tiger and Ocean, especially both the conversations. But I think what that brought up in me is, you know, pornography is something that many, many men in my life, especially with 20, 30, 40 years of what they would call recovery or sobriety, are really struggling with sex addiction or pornography. So I just think that to think about having because it's going on, the statistics are that there's more than likely than not that they've already have seen that in one way, shape or form, especially with, you know, cell phones. And so I just can't even thank you enough for having that conversation, because I could feel healing in me of like me being at that age and struggling since 11 to all the way into 40 years old with something like that, because things have changed and the accessibility. How do I actually heal my nervous system? You know? So I think there's a reason for that we won't get into in this episode, but I just so appreciate that example, and just being that authentic and creating that safe container has been a theme in this episode for him to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I want to say, that because sometimes in my conversations, I'm like, my dad didn't do that for me, so I did it for my kids. I want to be clear that I'm not angry at my dad, and I have been, and that's okay. Right. But I'm not blaming him now. I really believe my dad did the best he could with what he had. And I think that every generation can build on the next. I think we have access to different resources and tools, and we can heal and we can continue to evolve. I do believe that. So I just took what my dad created for me, which was awesome, and I built upon that. And I think that's what all of our kids have the opportunity to do, is take what they've been passed on and then build on that. And that's what I hope evolution is for people in their mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. Everything you're saying, there's so many golden nuggets here that I hadn't even considered before, because I'm not a dad, but actually this has been extremely relevant for me, and definitely going to make sure that all the dads get this episode. I would love to hear more about what are you doing today to create safety with these men, and in the work that you're doing with Front Row Dads. I mean, we have a mutual friend, John Berghoff, and Exchange, and Steve, and many people coming in to create this. You're already representing that. You're a living, walking example of that. So do you want to share anything about that and maybe what you're working on?
Yeah. Sometimes it's just saying it. Hey, I want this to be a safe space. Sometimes it's just declaring what you want to be true and setting an intention publicly. You can call in that what you want. We've written it into our values, and we read our values. We publish them, we post them, we've written them, we've defined them. So that's part of it. The other one is to go there first. I've been at many events where the level of vulnerability in the room is only so much. And then all of a sudden, like, I'll open up my mouth and bust out a story that they're like, did Jon just say that? Like, in a room full of people? Did he just admit to that? And the answer is like, yeah, he did. And that's your invitation. And people always come up to me at the end and they go, the event was like a 5 out of 10 being vulnerable. And when you shared that story, Jon, everybody went to a 9 out of 10 vulnerable, because you just gave the room permission. You're like, oh, we get to go there? All right, cool. So somebody has to go first and be vulnerable and be open and lead the way, oftentimes to set the tone, to create an expectation in a community. There needs to be some rules and some agreements, like, hey, can we all agree that nothing said here leaves the room? We'll do that at events. We'll have people raise their hand and say, if you agree that nothing that's said here leaves this room, not to anybody, not even to another person in this room, if they weren't part of the conversation that you had privately in the corner with that other guy, if he doesn't want you to say it, right? And you don't say it without, you always keep every conversation. Are we agree? Yes, hands up. Perfect. Double checking. Does anybody not agree with that rule? Is anybody, by show of hands, not committing to being confidential? No hands go up, right? Now, okay, cool. Now we have a agreement. And is it ironclad? Is it a guarantee? Of course not. But what is, right? In many ways. And so we design it. We intentionally bring it. We also curate men to be in our community by speaking out who we are from the get-go. So when they are listening to the podcast, when they're listening to this show, when they are learning about Front Row Dads, they constantly hear about these things, so that by the time they're a member of Front Row Dads, they're stepping into a place where, like, I kind of know how it works around here. So creating a container is an art form, and that container is an ecosystem that allows for something to grow and emerge, just like it happens in nature, just like when we're tending to the garden. There's some design elements. There are certain ingredients that make things work. And in groups and families, in any community, that's also the same. And like you said, Jon Berghoff has studied this deeply. He's one of the best in the world at it, if not arguably the best in the world at it. You're incredible at it. Jon has sung your praises countless times about your ability to facilitate. I think it was actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the company's name, but it was Heart Math. You can delete that, by the way, if I'm not allowed to say that. Right? But Jon talked about handing the reins over to you and letting you lead. And, you've done that very, very well. You're doing that right now in this show, partially because of our relationship, partially because of how you're holding space for me.
Well, thank you for that, brother. I really appreciate that. And I think it's really important for people to know that that's possible to create, to create that safety where all voices are being heard and people are feeling led through that container that, it's okay to be vulnerable, but you have to set that example. People don't know what that means until you do that. And I think in my space with this show, Entrepreneurs in Recovery, it's, this is and again, every show will start with what my definition of recovery is so we don't scare everyone off, because my definition of recovery is literally you're recovering your nervous system. You're recovering from caretaking. You're recovering from abandoning your inner child your whole life. So that's my version of recovery. It's a wide open lens. So
I'm recovering from being a hero and a people pleaser.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the people pleasing was a big one. And that's, something that came up with years. I mean, I have a degree as a therapist, a mental health counseling degree, and none of that was touched until one of my medicine journeys where I took that head on for sure for hours. And it finally released that need for caretaking. It's not that it's completely gone. I can still feel it there coming in as a validation tool, as an addiction, but I'm much more aware of it. And I can see my part in that. So that's beautiful, beautiful. Well, as we kind of get to the end here, is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners? Maybe you have something coming up, an event or a book, something that's coming up. This is all authentic, so we didn't really prepare it and get any.
No. Yeah. Oh, it's great. I think that if they're listening to this, that they maybe like to listen to things. So the podcast, Front Row Dads, is the podcast title now. We're considering a rebrand on that in the near future. But Front Row Dads, just type that in. Go to frontrowdads.com if you want all the info. And I think if you start with the podcast, it's a great place to go. And if you want to take the deep dive and just join the community, then go to frontrowdads.com and join the wait list. We open up for new members about 6 times a year. And then that's it. Those are my 2 invites. And, honestly, there's a third invite, which is whether you listen to the Front Row Dads podcast or ever join our community, my invitation is connect with yourself and connect with those that you love. Because I think when we do that, my hope is that it just leads to a better place for all of us.
Love that. And, I was going to ask, how can people find you? But I think you just told us how to do that.
Frontrowdads.com.
Is there anything is there anything that you can think about when you think about my audience, which is going to be all the way from, maybe David Osborne types all the way down to people into the drug court? It's not that they're down below, but it's just where they are with the trauma and just the way this has landed for them in this realm. Is there anything that you could offer them, or anything besides this podcast, which is free and is going to be spread around? Is there anything else that you'd like to offer our listeners? I'm putting you on the spot here. Is there anything you can think of?
Just a word of encouragement. That's all I want to offer is like, look, if you're listening, maybe it's not by accident that you're hearing my words, and like the words are, you're worthy, you're enough. You're here for a reason. There's a reason that you're listening to this particular show, and it's up to us to decide what that is. And the point is, we're all just at some point on the journey. We're all dealing with some addictions along the way. I know people with no money, with lots of money, with no, quote unquote success, lots of quote unquote success, or whatever, lots of friends, not a lot of friends, whatever spectrum, you want to lay out. Everybody on that path is dealing with some form of addiction, some form of trauma, some form of like not enoughness, some form of challenge with seeing ourselves, witnessing ourselves, self-love. And some of it is just we have blind spots. Some of it we're enlightened to. But the point is that wherever you are, to just surrender to that, whatever is, and then let everything be for you. I think it's a beautiful way to go through life when you're like, things aren't happening to me, they're happening for me. And if everything in your world is not by accident, if all the stuff you've been through, and that's easier said than done, especially when somebody's dealt with some serious trauma. Like you're saying, oh, that happened for me, Jon. Like I get that there's pushback on all of this, but I do genuinely believe that in my view of the world, things had to happen the way they had to happen. And to resist that means that we lose our opportunity to be in the lesson and in the learning and in the change and in the now, that we can do something different, perhaps with the resources that we've been given. Feels to me there's always choice. It's like, well, I always like that Viktor Frankl quote of like, between stimulus and response is a space, and within that is the choice. And I think that's where we all are. So that's my invitation to anybody, no matter where they are on their journey, is like, choose, what's your choice today?
Beautiful. Jon Vroman, thank you so much. And they just really thank you for your authenticity. And really, I'm going to take another listen to this as well for myself, just to hear these lessons of fatherhood and all the things you shared with us today. So thank you so much, brother. Appreciate you being on the show.
Love you, man.